A short time ago, I was doing the rounds on my favourite forums and social media pages when I received a message from a reviews regular, Joel, asking if I would be interested in taking part in an event over on the Movie Forum's website. The event in question? A Hall of Fame selection of 12 B-movies and obscurities in which I myself and several other dedicated followers of celluloid will endeavour to watch and eventually crown a winner for the best B-movie of the bunch. So I decided, rather than writing my thoughts down, because that could get quite long-winded, that instead I would make a video covering my thoughts on these films and eventually reveal my winner, once all the films had been watched. Before we begin, it's worth mentioning that if you're still interested in joining in the fun, the competition is running from now until October or November time, so there's plenty of time to work through some of these yet. Also, as a means of not ending up with a 2-hour-long video, I'm not going to be doing my typical style of review for these films. In part for the timing, and in part because some of the films that have been nominated were actually already on my to-review list, and I want to give them a bit more time and breathing space to really do them justice. So this is pretty much going to be my instant gut reaction to these films, with none of the under-the-hood analysis that I normally do, unless I absolutely have to. So, I have a couple of beers ready, there's a pizza on the way. Let's make this happen. If you were going to try and make a film that was specifically aimed at me, The Child would probably be the kind of film you'd end up making. Directed by Robert Voskanian and starring Laurel Barnett, Rosalie Cole and young Neil Breen lookalike Richard Hanners, the film follows Barnett as a nanny on her way back to the town she grew up in order to look after the daughter of a rather reclusive family who recently lost their mother. There's strange goings-on in the local graveyard, and animals are turning up in the woods, mutilated and in grim states. The family's daughter is often seen walking through the graveyard and continually talks about her new friends who she plays with at night and away from the grown-ups. It's all very macabre. I loved this film. Loved it. I really couldn't tell you what I was expecting going into this, but what I got was not what I envisioned. It's terrifically atmospheric, there's some lovely moody lighting and a nice use of smoke and fog to help keep things nice and claustrophobic. The direction's fab for the time of its production, and I have to say that I was very impressed with just how stylised this film really was. It kind of wanders a bit into experimental territory with some scenes, and there were moments that I thought were actually really inspired. The soundtrack's haunting, and I'd really like to get my hands on it, and Rosalie's new friends are really well used throughout this. They're used sparingly, and when the big third act showdown finally does hit, I was very impressed with just how good they looked. However, it's not all smooth sailing, sadly. While I commend the film for looking very stylised and being creative in its scene structure, I have to say this looks terrifically old for the year it was released. This was made in 1977, and had I not known the date this film was made, I'd have easily had it down as being made in the late 60s or early 70s. I just really struggled to comprehend that this film was made after films like The Wicker Man, Jaws and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It feels like this should have been made well before any of those. Also, I have to mention the dialogue and performances in this are ridiculously robotic. I'm not sure how many of the people in this film are professional actors and how many of them are just friends of the director or locals who wanted to help out in the production, but it reminded me of Manos the Hands of Fate to a point, or maybe some of Ed Wood's work. All the dialogue is very descriptive, overly aimed at plot explanation, and there isn't really all that much of an actual plot present beyond what I described earlier. It's all very stilted, very poorly delivered, and just odd to watch. It reminded me a bit of David Lynch's work. Not in terms of stories or actually being good, but just that sense of high stylization mixed with dreamlike, disjointed dialogue. I mean, for me it works because I like that kind of thing. But for people who don't like it, or are unaware that it can be quite a common thing in cinema, I feel it could isolate them. In short, I really enjoyed this movie. Despite its strange script and dialogue, I found it overwhelmingly powerful and very creative. It's one part Blood Feast meets one part Eraserhead meets one part Evil Dead, and I loved it for that. It's a real strong contender for my number one spot, and it was right out of the gate. The Burning, also known as Friday the 13th Part 2, Part 2, was actually a film that I'd been meaning to talk about for the best part of a year over on my YouTube channel. In fact, it was quite fortunate that it came up here, really, because it gave me a good excuse to finally break the seal on my fully remastered Arrow Blu-ray of this one. My only hope was that this film was as good as the cover looked. Sadly, this was not to be the case. The Burning is a typical summer camp slasher in every sense of the genre. Think the first 3 Friday the 13th films and maybe the Sleepaway Camp movies and you're probably on the right track for exactly how this film plays out. I can't say that I hated this film, it just didn't really do it for me. While it was nice to see a slasher movie actually have a fair bit of gore about it, there are scenes in this that would give many of Fulci's movies a run for their money. And I really have to take my hat off to Tom Savini here, who does an astounding job of making those gore shots land. It's all a bit pedestrian for me, sadly. While the direction is very enveloping and certainly puts you into the forest environment, and the killings are very well orchestrated, and those opening shots of the city are very nicely done as well, I just couldn't really get into the plot for this one. The murders are few and far between, and the cast just aren't all that likeable. In fact, with the exception of Jason Alexander's Dave, his first feature acting role if IMDb is correct, who seems animate and fairly good fun, the majority of the male cast all come across as a bit molesty. Insert Harvey Weinstein joke here. And the women all just seem a bit giggly and are seemingly present in a skin-only capacity. More to the point, the entire cast here seem to just be incredibly irritating. They're all teens in the worst possible sense. Look, I like to think that young adults can be incredibly meaningful, insightful and intelligent, but with the exception of 1 or 2 characters in this, they're all whiny and just incredibly annoying. I honestly wasn't bothered if any of these characters even lived or died. While this one does have a totally killer soundtrack and there are some shots here that are pretty beautiful and well thought out, there just sadly wasn't enough here to keep me fully on board throughout. I'll definitely be keeping my copy of this movie because I think it would make a great B-feature to some other summer camp film. But on its own merit, it's a bit... Nice video, shame about the song. So as to avoid bias, I'll keep this one very brief. The Dragon Lives Again is one of my favourite B-movies of all time. I first saw it about 10 years ago, and I couldn't believe that a film like this could get made, let alone distributed. A collision of different characters and scenarios, random encounters and high-octane martial arts makes this one of the cheesiest B-movies in my collection. I don't think there's been a year since I found this film where I haven't sat down and watched it at least once. I mean, I'll concede it's not the best made film in the world. There's not really anything in the way of a script for this one. Bruce Lee goes to hell, makes gambling illegal, makes friends with Popeye, and beats the crap out of James Bond and Dracula. Meanwhile, Emmanuel plans to kill Satan, the king of the underworld, and I'm going to be delicate here, by fucking him to death. This is a horror movie, by the way, that desperately needs to happen. It's a totally insane film that's only available in one of the crappiest quality film prints I've ever seen. The cinematography is mostly bland, but does have one or two flurries of imagination here and there. The direction is unique, but at the same time doesn't go far enough in making this stand out in my mind. But I'm talking about the plot, cine, and direction here as if it was a work of art. As if this film were anything that could be even quantified. This isn't something to be analysed, this is something to be absorbed. Like the murderous girl from The Ring, once you've seen this movie, it will stay with you pretty much for the rest of your life. And I guarantee by the Popeye spinach scene, you'll be completely on board with this utter train wreck / masterpiece of copyright infringing glory. I won't be ranking it particularly highly, if at all, in this competition at least, purely because I think that would be unfair. But in any other circumstances, this one would be easily up there for me. It brings me great sadness to have to say that Hunter's Blood is the first film I've watched in this Hall of Fame that just really didn't do it for me. Spoilers ahead. The plot's simple enough. A load of city slickers decide to go on a hunting trip and have a couple of run-ins with some backwater hillbilly sorts, which culminates in the hillbillies being arrested, escaping arrest and swearing revenge on the city boys who nearly put them away. It sounds fine on paper, maybe even pretty good, except for one problem. Absolutely bugger all happens in the first 2 acts of this film. Literally, the first act of this movie is just the guys getting ready to go hunting, going hunting, and building up rapport with each other. The second act involves the hillbillies and works to try and put across that something's going to happen with them, but things don't really start to pick up till the hillbillies get guns and start trying to hunt the hunters, which is just over 2/3 of the way into this film. It doesn't help that this, to me at least, just looks plain ugly. The direction's a bit bland, and while there's the odd interesting bit of cine here and there, it's all just a bit forgettable. The acting is more than decent enough, with some great performances from all involved and some very OTT moments on both sides. But good performances do not a classic make, sadly. There are, however, some pretty cool death scenes in this, and the soundtrack's perfectly fitting for what it wants to be. It just takes way too long to get going, and by the time it finally does heat up in the third act, I'd all but lost interest, really. I wish I could be nicer about this one, but I guess you can't be lucky every time. I will admit this, though. The ending? Great stuff. This was a damn fun little film. I've been aware of Jack Frost for a number of years by this point, mainly due to that shower scene. If you've seen this, you'll know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, oh dear lord, don't Google it. And for its frankly bizarre looking cover, which looked out of place on the shelves of my local HMV when this was first released and continues to look out of place to this day, it's pretty much what you expect based on the promotional material. It's a killer snowman movie. It's as simple as that. A multiple murderer who is either literally called Jack Frost or has the nickname Jack Frost is being transferred to a new prison to be executed, and on the way the police vehicle gets hit in the snow by a chemical truck which sprays its load all over Jack and seemingly melts him. Only it doesn't. It fuses him with the snow, turning him into an unstoppable killer snowman who vows revenge on the sheriff who put him away. I had a blast with this movie. It screams Troma pretty consistently. Though in all honesty, there are some moments in this that I think even Troma would probably think were pushing the boundaries a bit. It's some good, solid filmmaking, and while it isn't perfect, there's a lot to enjoy here. The script can be a bit irritating at times on the dialogue front, and some of the murder sequences fall more into the uncomfortably awkward instead of the self-aware black comedy feel, but these are thankfully small and ultimately forgivable things. The closest I can compare it to tonally is Bride of Chucky. It's not quite as good as Bride of Chucky, but that's where the tone, humour and pace of this sit. All in all, it's camp as Christmas and a right good laugh. So far this one's probably one of my favourites. With a title like Spaced Invaders, I was pretty much convinced I was about to sit through what would effectively amount to a stoner comedy with aliens. I did recall seeing a trailer for this one a number of years ago, and based on what I remembered from that trailer, it only really reinforced this belief. However, I was very much surprised and pleased with the fact that this movie's actually pretty much just a family film, and quite a charming one at that. It follows a group of aliens who land on Earth at Halloween, mistaking a repeat broadcast of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds as a radio report on a battle taking place on Earth. Only when the aliens arrive on Earth, it turns out they've landed in a quiet Midwestern American farming community, and they're quickly mistaken for trick-or-treaters. Cue hilarious antics and pop culture references. After experiencing horrors, action movies and martial arts films for weeks and weeks at a time, it's actually quite nice to sit down and just enjoy a quite well-made, if not a touch generic, family movie. The direction's above and beyond the norm, and while the cine acting is maybe a little bit bland, there's some really cool ideas in this. Like the aliens having their own music, or a shock collar type device that turns living creatures into robotic slaves with laser eyes. It's good, wholesome fun. In fact, I don't think there's anything inappropriate in this entire picture. A good, solid filmmaking attempt, and while it won't win any awards for originality, I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy this one. It left me with a warm, fuzzy feeling, which could either be a sense of heartwarming empathy with the characters in this, or nausea. I'll get back to you on that one. But yeah, this movie, lovely stuff. So, that's the first 6, there's 6 more to go, and I'll see you on the other side of October for those. Till next time.